William had practiced the conversation so many times that he almost smiled when Victoria opened the door exactly as he'd imagined. What he hadn't imagined was her smile. It was warm, polite, and strangely free of hesitation. She asked if he still took 1 spoonful of sugar in his coffee, then listened without interrupting while he stumbled through the first apology. The longer she stayed quiet, the faster he talked. Then, in the middle of a sentence, he stopped, his eyes fixed on something across the living room. Victoria didn't ask what was wrong. She simply lowered her cup, folded her hands, and waited. For a long moment, William couldn't remember a single word he'd come there to say. Welcome to the Greer Stories. Thank you to everyone who has supported this channel and helped us grow. We truly appreciate every one of you. If you're new here, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe and become part of our growing family. The first person to tell William and Victoria they were making a mistake wasn't a family member. It was their real estate agent. She unlocked the front door, looked at the cracked windows, the sagging ceiling, and the faded "for sale" sign still leaning against the porch, then gave them one last chance to change their minds. You two have good jobs, she said. You don't have to buy the hardest house on the street. William looked around the living room. The place had clearly been loved once. It just hadn't been loved in a long time. Before he could answer, Victoria walked past him and stopped in front of the old fireplace. Someone had painted over the original brick years earlier. The oak mantel was scratched. One corner leaned slightly lower than the other. William joined her. I was wondering how long it'd take you to find that. Victoria smiled. It's the best part of the room. The best part? It's original. William laughed. It also looks like it's falling apart. She brushed a little dust off the mantel with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Or maybe it just looks like nobody's taken care of it. The real estate agent shook her head with a smile. I've shown this house to 23 couples. Victoria glanced over, and every single one wanted to tear that fireplace out. Victoria looked back at the brick. I wouldn't. William studied her for a moment. You've already decided, haven't you? She nodded. I decided the second I walked in. That afternoon, they bought the house. Their friends thought they were crazy. One joked that they'd spend more at the hardware store than they had on the down payment. Another asked why 2 professionals would choose a house that needed so much work. William shrugged. It has good bones. Victoria smiled. It has a future. For the next year, weekdays belonged to work. Weekends belonged to the house. Saturday mornings started with coffee from the same diner on the corner, then a stop at the hardware store where they somehow always bought one more thing than they'd planned. Some weekends ended with a freshly painted room. Others ended with another problem hidden behind a wall. A leaking pipe, old wiring, rotten floorboards. Whenever one project ended, another one introduced itself. Still, they never talked about giving up. The fireplace became their favorite project. William wanted to replace it, mostly because it seemed faster. Victoria crouched in front of the old brick, scraped away a small patch of paint, and smiled. Look! The original red brick peeked through. William knelt beside her. I didn't know that was under there. Most people wouldn't. So, we're keeping it? She looked at him. I think we'd regret throwing away the best thing in the room before we gave it a chance. William nodded. Then we're keeping it. 3 weekends later, the fireplace looked almost new. Not perfect, just cared for again. William reached into his pocket for his phone. I'll get a picture. Victoria laughed. No. What? We've been taking pictures with our phones all month. So, in 10 years, we'll probably forget which folder they're in. He smiled. What do you want to do? Let's print one. Just one? She nodded. The important ones deserve a frame. The following weekend, a friend stopped by with a camera. William still wore his dusty work boots. Victoria still had white paint across one cheek. The photographer smiled. You two want a minute to clean up? Victoria looked at William and laughed. No. William looked down at himself. I look terrible. She slipped her hand into his. You look exactly like the man who helped me save this house. The photographer lowered the camera for a second. Don't move. William looked confused. Why? Because that's the real smile. The shutter clicked. A few days later, William hung the framed photograph above the fireplace. He stepped back. Crooked? Victoria tilted her head. A little. He adjusted it. Now? She smiled. Perfect. William crossed his arms. I'll never understand how you can tell. You don't have to. He laughed. I guess that's why you're the architect. She bumped his shoulder. And you're the one who makes my drawings stand up. They stood there longer than either of them expected. The room finally felt finished. As William admired the photograph, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Work, Victoria noticed. You should get that. It can wait. The phone buzzed again. He hesitated. I'll be right back. She nodded. No rush. He stepped into the hallway, answered the call, and came back a few minutes later. Victoria was still standing in front of the fireplace, looking at the photograph. He slipped his phone into his pocket. Sorry about that. She smiled. I know. He put his arm around her shoulders. What are you thinking about? She looked at the framed picture above the mantel. I think every time something big happens in our lives. She smiled. We should add another one. William looked at the empty wall. We're going to need a lot more frames. I hope so. He laughed. I'll make sure of it. Neither of them realized that the wall above the fireplace would slowly become the timeline of their marriage. At first, every new photograph would arrive because something wonderful had happened. Years later, what mattered just as much were the spaces between them. For a while, it felt as though life was rewarding every sacrifice they'd made. William's promotion came on a Tuesday. He drove home early, stopped at a grocery store for a bottle of champagne, and walked through the front door wearing a smile Victoria hadn't seen in weeks. She looked from the bottle to his face. Okay, either you got promoted or you bought the wrong champagne. William laughed. I got promoted. She wrapped her arms around him before he could say anything else. I knew you would. No, you didn't. I absolutely did. He kissed her forehead. We're celebrating tonight. No phones? He held his hands up. No phones. She smiled. I'll believe that when I see it. An hour later, they were eating takeout on the living room floor. Just like they had during the renovation, the dining table was only a few feet away. Neither of them even thought about using it. Victoria raised her plastic cup. To finally having weekends again. William laughed. I like the sound of that. His phone vibrated. He looked at it, then flipped it face down. Victoria noticed, but didn't say anything. A minute later, it vibrated again. He ignored it. The third time, he let out a slow breath. I'm sorry. She smiled. I know. You don't mind? I mind. He looked up. But I also know you're going to answer it. For a second, neither of them moved. Then William reached for the phone. I'll be right back. Victoria watched him disappear into the hallway. By the time he returned, the food was cold. Neither of them mentioned it. The next Saturday, they planned to finish the built-in bookshelves in the family room. William measured the wall. Victoria looked over his shoulder. You're off. No, I'm not. She took the tape measure from his hand. You measured from the trim. He looked again. I hate when you're right. You hate how often I'm right. He laughed. That's also true. Halfway through the afternoon, his phone rang again. William stared at the screen. Didn't move. It rang a second time. Victoria kept sanding the shelf. You can get it. I don't want to. It might be important. He smiled. You've said that before. And you've always answered. He hesitated, then picked up the phone. By the time the conversation ended, the bookshelves were finished. Victoria was wiping sawdust off her jeans. You did all of it? You were busy. I said I'd help. You meant to. There wasn't any anger in her voice. That somehow made it worse. Weeks turned into months. Sometimes William canceled plans. Sometimes Victoria did. She began accepting larger architectural projects that demanded evenings and weekends. One Friday, he came home carrying tickets to a jazz festival she'd wanted to attend for years. She looked genuinely excited. Then, Her expression changed. "Oh. What? My presentation. You can move it." She smiled apologetically. "You've tried saying that to your clients lately?" William didn't answer. Instead, he placed the tickets on the kitchen counter. Neither of them blamed the other. That was the problem. By autumn, the house was finished. Life wasn't. At the neighborhood block party, an older neighbor balanced a paper plate in one hand and smiled at William. "You two still own that beautiful porch swing?" William laughed. "Of course. Haven't seen either of you sitting on it all summer." William looked toward his house across the street. The swing moved gently in the evening breeze. He couldn't remember the last quiet evening they had spent there together. When they got home, Victoria unlocked the front door first. She paused in the living room. "We forgot." William looked around. What? The picture. She was holding the plaque she'd received that afternoon for another restoration project. They had celebrated. They had hosted friends. They had laughed. Neither of them had remembered the photograph. William rubbed the back of his neck. "We'll do it tomorrow." Victoria looked toward the fireplace. The first framed picture still showed two people covered in paint, laughing as though nothing in the world could interrupt them. She smiled. "Tomorrow." The word came easily. It always had. The next afternoon, a neighbor came over with a camera. William slipped his arm around Victoria. "Smile," the neighbor said. They did. The camera clicked. "One more." This time, William looked at Victoria before looking at the lens. She smiled back. It was warm. It was familiar, but it lasted only a second before her attention drifted toward the ringing phone inside the house. Neither of them moved. The phone stopped, then started again. The neighbor lowered the camera. "You two gonna get that?" William looked at Victoria. She shrugged. "It might be important." He stood there for another second, then walked inside. The neighbor quietly lowered the camera. Victoria stayed exactly where she was. A light breeze stirred the leaves above the front yard. Across the living room, the fireplace waited. Above it, there was still space for another photograph. For the first time since they bought the house, that empty space felt like it was waiting for something neither of them knew how to hold on to. The first thing to disappear wasn't love. It was routine. For years, Victoria knew almost to the minute when William would pull into the driveway. If dinner needed another 10 minutes, she waited. If he was running late, he always called. Then his days stopped belonging to the clock. One Tuesday evening, she set 2 plates on the table. At 6:30, she covered his with foil. At 7, she put it in the oven. At 8:15, her phone rang. "I'm sorry," William said over the noise of traffic. "I'm 20 minutes away." She looked at the untouched place setting. "I figured. You should have eaten." "I know. I'll make it up to you." She smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I know." After they hung up, she carried her own plate to the sink. His stayed in the oven. When William finally walked through the door, he stopped. "You waited." "For a while." He looked at the oven, then at her. "I'm getting predictable." She didn't answer. She only reheated dinner. A week later, William surprised her with flowers. No anniversary, no birthday, no reason. She opened the front door, looked at the bouquet, and laughed. "What did you do?" "I haven't done anything." "Yet." He grinned. "I just missed you." For a moment, everything felt like it used to. They cooked together, ate on the back porch, laughed about the first time William tried to paint a ceiling, and somehow ended up with more paint on himself than the room. Before going to bed, Victoria stopped in front of the fireplace. "We're overdue." William looked up from the couch. "For what?" "A new picture." He smiled. "Let's take one this weekend." "Promise?" He walked over, kissed her forehead, and answered without hesitation. "Promise." That Saturday morning, Victoria was already dressed when William came downstairs. Camera bag by the front door. Coffee waiting. She looked at him and smiled. "I even picked the park." William smiled back. "Perfect." His phone rang. He frowned. "I'm not answering." It rang again. He silenced it. Victoria reached for her keys. "I'm proud of you." The phone rang a third time. This time, The screen lit up with 3 letters. CEO. William stared at it. Victoria saw his face change. You should probably get that. I told you today was ours. And if it's your CEO? He looked at the camera bag, then at the phone, then back at Victoria. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Finally, William pressed decline. Victoria blinked. You actually ignored it. He smiled. I made a promise. She laughed, slipped her hand into his, and together they walked toward the front door. William had one hand on the doorknob when the house phone rang. Neither of them had heard it ring in months. They looked at each other. Who still uses the house number? Victoria asked. The answering machine picked up. A familiar voice filled the hallway. William, it's David from the office. The CEO can't reach your cell. We've got a serious problem at the Chicago distribution center. He needs you immediately. Silence. Victoria looked at William. William looked at the camera bag waiting by the door. He closed his eyes for a brief second. I can fix it and still make the afternoon. She nodded once. I know. He stepped toward her. I'm serious. I know. He kissed her forehead, grabbed his laptop instead of the camera bag, and hurried out the front door. Victoria stood there until she heard his car pull away. The house became quiet again. She looked down at the camera bag, then slowly carried it back into the closet. Later that evening, William unlocked the front door just after 9. The living room lights were off. Only the lamp beside the fireplace remained on. He walked over automatically. The wall still held the same 3 photographs. There was still space waiting for the next one. Victoria came downstairs in comfortable clothes, carrying 2 mugs of reheated coffee. She handed him one. I guess the picture can wait another week. William looked at the empty space above the fireplace, then back at Victoria. No. His voice was calm. This one doesn't count. She searched his face. What doesn't? He looked at the empty wall again. A milestone. The word lingered between them. Neither of them realized they had just changed the meaning of every photograph that would follow. The next morning, Victoria opened her email before breakfast. She read the message once, then again. It was an invitation to compete for the restoration of the Ashton Children's Reading Center, the largest project of her career. She reached for her phone to call William. Across town, William was already in a conference room. His phone vibrated against the table. He glanced at Victoria's name, then at the executives waiting for him to begin. For the first time in years, he let her call go to voicemail. Victoria carried the invitation in her purse for 2 days before she showed it to William. Not because she wasn't excited, because she didn't want to hear another promise made too quickly. On Thursday evening, William was standing in the kitchen, trying to season chicken while answering an email with one hand. Without saying anything, Victoria placed the cream-colored envelope beside his plate. He glanced at it. What's this? She leaned against the counter. Open it. He wiped his hands on a towel, slid a finger under the seal, and unfolded the letter. His eyes stopped halfway down the page. They chose your project. Victoria smiled. They did. He looked back at the letter, as if he wanted to make sure he hadn't imagined it. The state awards? She nodded. The Ashton Children's Reading Center. For a second, he didn't speak. Then he laughed. Not loudly. Just the kind of laugh that escaped before words could. I knew it. Victoria raised an eyebrow. No, you didn't. I hoped it. That's different. It counts. He crossed the kitchen and wrapped his arms around her. I'm proud of you. She rested her head against his shoulder. I know. They stood there another moment before he picked up the invitation again. When is it? 3 Fridays from now. He reached for his phone. Victoria noticed immediately. You don't have to check your calendar right now. I'm not checking it. He unlocked the screen. I'm clearing it. He opened his schedule. A logistics review. Deleted. A supplier meeting. Rescheduled. An executive briefing request. Declined. He turned the phone around so she could see the now empty afternoon. There. Victoria stared at the screen. You didn't even think about it. I already did the thinking. She looked at him carefully. I almost didn't tell you. William frowned. Why? She shrugged. I wasn't sure. He waited. If you could make it. Silence settled between them, not awkward, heavy. You thought I'd miss this? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He looked away for a moment, then back at her. I've missed birthdays. She nodded. I know. I've missed dinners. I know. I've missed vacations. Another nod. I know. He took a slow breath. I'm not missing this. This time there wasn't excitement in his voice. There was conviction. Victoria searched his face. Not for confidence, for certainty. Finally she smiled. Okay. Just one word. But it sounded different from all the others. For the first time in a long while, she stopped preparing herself for disappointment before anything had gone wrong. The next morning, William walked into the office carrying 2 coffees. His assistant looked up. Good morning. He handed one to her. Celebrate with me. What happened? My wife. She laughed. What about her? She's receiving the State Architecture Award. Her eyes widened. Seriously? He nodded with unmistakable pride. They're honoring the Reading Center restoration. Congratulations to her. I'll tell her. Before lunch, 3 different people heard the story. Not because William wanted attention, because every time someone asked how he was doing, that was the answer that came out first. My wife's receiving an award. For once, work wasn't the biggest thing happening in his life. Late that afternoon, a regional director stopped outside William's office. Can I borrow you next Friday after lunch? William didn't even glance at his calendar. No, the director smiled. Already booked. My wife's ceremony. Can't move it? William smiled politely. I wouldn't if I could. The director nodded once. Fair enough. As he walked away, William leaned back in his chair. It felt good. Not saying yes. Not promising to squeeze one more meeting into an already full day. For once, protecting something important had been easy. On Saturday morning, William pulled into a men's clothing store. A salesman greeted him with an easy smile. What brings you in? I need a suit. Wedding? William laughed. No. Big interview? No. The salesman adjusted a rack of jackets. So what's the occasion? William smiled without hesitation. My wife's receiving an award. The salesman looked at him for a second, then smiled back. Congratulations. He reached for a navy suit. I think this one's worth remembering. That evening, Victoria found the garment bag hanging outside the bedroom closet. You actually bought one. William shrugged. I wanted to look like I belonged beside you. She unzipped the bag and ran her hand across the sleeve. You already did. He smiled. No, I mean it. She looked at him. I've never cared what suit you wore. I know. So, why buy another one? He answered without thinking. Because I don't want to look back at the photographs someday and wish I'd made more of the moments that mattered. Victoria fell quiet. Not because of the suit. Because of the sentence. She stepped closer and straightened his collar. You've been trying harder lately. I have. I've noticed. He smiled. Is it working? She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. It is. Neither of them noticed the fireplace across the room. 3 photographs looked back at them from above the mantel. One empty space still waited beside them. This time, both of them believed they already knew what would fill it. And for the first time in years, they believed it together. Friday began exactly the way William had imagined it would. He left home early, coffee in one hand, garment bag hanging neatly in the back seat of his car. Before closing the front door, he looked back inside. Victoria was standing in the kitchen, fastening a small silver bracelet. You look nervous, he said. She smiled. I am. You don't need to be. Says the man who bought a new suit. He laughed. Fair. She walked over and brushed an invisible piece of lint from his jacket. You'll be home by 4? I'll be home before 4. She studied him for a second. Okay. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. No meetings. I know. No surprises. I know. I'll see you there. She watched him back out of the driveway. This time, she didn't stand at the window after his car disappeared. She picked up her coffee and finished getting ready. For the first time in years, she trusted the promise enough to stop checking the clock. At the office, everything cooperated. Emails were answered early. Morning meetings finished ahead of schedule. William looked at the clock. 11:48. Perfect. His assistant walked into the office carrying a folder. "You've had a good day." "So far. You still leaving early?" "Absolutely." She smiled. "Your suit's ready." He glanced toward the navy garment bag hanging beside the window. "I've never been happier to leave work." She laughed. "I'll pretend I didn't hear that." At exactly 12:57 p.m., his desk phone rang. His assistant answered before transferring the call. Her expression changed. She knocked once and stepped inside. "They need you upstairs." William looked up. "Who?" "The executive team." "What happened?" "They didn't say." He checked the time. "I've got plenty of time." She nodded. "I'm sure it'll be quick." So was he. He grabbed a notebook and headed upstairs. He didn't bother taking the suit. The executive conference room was already full. The CEO stood beside a screen covered with maps, shipment schedules, and flashing alerts. No one was sitting. William felt his stomach tighten. The CEO spoke without preamble. "Our freight management system crashed at 11:43. The room fell silent. "Chicago has stopped moving shipments." Another screen changed. "Dallas is 30 minutes behind." Another. "Phoenix is next." The CEO looked directly at William. "I need logistics." William nodded. "How long?" "I wish I knew." He glanced at his watch. 1:12. Still enough time. He'd solve the problem. Change into the suit. Drive to the museum. It was still possible. Across town, Victoria arrived at the Riverside Museum carrying the garment bag that held her evening dress. The lobby buzzed with quiet excitement. Architects greeted one another. Old professors embraced former students. A volunteer welcomed her with a smile. "Victoria?" "Yes." "We're so glad you're here." She handed Victoria a name badge and an envelope. "Your husband's reserved seat is right beside yours." Victoria smiled. "Thank you." She didn't think twice about it. Back at the office, one problem solved another appeared. A transportation vendor couldn't reconnect. A server restarted unexpectedly. An insurance approval stalled hundreds of outgoing deliveries. Every solution uncovered something else. At 2:06 p.m., William checked the time. "I need 2 minutes." The CEO nodded. "Make it fast." William stepped into the hallway and immediately called Victoria. Voicemail. He smiled. Probably in makeup already. He left a message. "Running a little behind, but I'm still coming. Save me the seat." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned to the meeting. He never imagined that voicemail would become the last promise she heard before walking onto the stage. At the museum, Victoria's phone vibrated inside her purse. She reached for it. Before she could press play, another volunteer hurried over. "They're ready for rehearsal." Victoria looked at the voicemail notification. "William," she smiled to herself. "I'll listen after rehearsal." She slipped the phone away. She wanted to hear his voice when she had a quiet moment. At 3:18 p.m., the meeting finally ended. William exhaled. "We're done?" The CEO nodded. "For now." William almost laughed with relief. He hurried downstairs, unlocked his office, and reached for the garment bag. Before he could unzip it, his assistant appeared in the doorway. "The Chicago client just landed." William stared at her. "I thought they canceled." "They changed their mind." "I can't. I told them." "They insisted." William looked at the clock. 3:21. He looked at the suit, then at his assistant. 10 minutes. "I'll tell them." 10 minutes became 25. 25 became 40. At 4:08 p.m., William stood up. "I'm sorry." The client looked confused. "We're not finished." "I know, but my wife needs me." He took one step toward the door. His phone rang. The CEO. William answered immediately. "I'm leaving now." "I need you upstairs." I can't. I wouldn't ask if there were another option. William closed his eyes. The parking garage sat just beyond the office windows. His car was waiting. His suit was waiting. Victoria was waiting. He looked down the hallway, then back toward the executive floor. I'll be there. The words came out almost automatically. The moment they left his mouth, he hated them. At 5:11 p.m., William finally walked out of the building. He changed into the navy suit in the parking garage. His hand shook enough that he buttoned the jacket wrong the first time. He climbed into the car. The navigation app estimated 52 minutes. The ceremony started in 79. He smiled. I can still do this. He pulled onto the interstate. 12 minutes later, traffic stopped, not slowed, stopped. A line of brake lights stretched farther than he could see. He refreshed the navigation. Major accident ahead. Estimated delay, 48 minutes. William rested both hands on the steering wheel. No. Cars didn't move. He called Victoria. No answer. He tried again. Voicemail. He opened a text message. I'm almost there. He erased it. Not true. He typed again. I'm stuck. Deleted. He stared at the blank screen. Every version sounded smaller than what he was about to miss. Finally, he wrote, I'm so sorry. I can't make it. He looked at the message for several seconds before pressing send. The phone slipped from his hand onto the passenger seat. For the first time all afternoon, there wasn't another decision left to make. Backstage, a volunteer smiled at Victoria. They're ready. She nodded. As she stepped toward the curtains, her phone vibrated. She didn't look. Not yet. She smiled to herself. He's probably outside. The announcer called her name. Applause filled the auditorium. Victoria walked onto the stage with steady shoulders and a warm smile. She accepted the award with both hands. The audience stood. Camera flashes lit the room. Only once did her eyes wander toward the front row. The reserved chair beside hers remained empty. The white name card still rested against its back. William Carter. She held her smile until the applause ended. Only then did she lower her eyes. Nearly 2 hours later, Victoria unlocked the front door. The house was silent. She slipped off her shoes and placed the award carefully on the dining table. Her phone buzzed. William. She looked at the screen, then placed the phone face down without answering. Instead, she walked into the living room. The fireplace stood exactly where it always had. 3 framed photographs looked back at her. She stood there for a long time, not crying, not angry, simply looking. Then she reached out and rested her fingertips on the very first photograph, the one covered in paint, the one where they couldn't stop laughing. Outside, headlights swept across the front window. William was finally home. Victoria didn't turn around. William stood outside the front door for a moment before reaching into his pocket. His hand stopped. Normally, he would unlock the door without thinking. Tonight, he rang the bell. The sound echoed through the house. No footsteps came. After a few seconds, he let himself in. The living room lamp was on. Victoria was sitting on the rug in front of the fireplace, still wearing the navy dress from the ceremony. The award rested on the coffee table. She looked over her shoulder. You're home? William nodded. I'm home. He held up the bouquet he'd bought at a grocery store on the drive back. I know flowers don't fix tonight. She looked at them for a second. No. They're beautiful, but they don't. He swallowed. I tried. I know. I left the meeting. I know. There was an accident on the interstate. I know. He frowned. You read my message. I did. A long silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, simply tired. William stepped closer and set the flowers on the dining table. I've been thinking about this drive for almost 2 hours. Victoria looked at him. I figured. I kept trying to come up with the right thing to say. And? I couldn't. She gave a small nod. Neither could I. He looked toward the award. You should tell me about it. A faint smile crossed her face. The speech? The whole night. She sat quietly for a moment. There isn't much to tell. There has to be. They called my name. She paused. I walked to the stage. Another pause. I accepted the award. William waited. She looked down at her hands. Then I came home. He realized she wasn't leaving anything out. That was how she remembered the evening. Not because nothing else had happened, because the only part she had wanted to remember hadn't. William sat beside her on the rug. I'm sorry. She didn't answer. Not because she was ignoring him, because she'd already heard those words many times. After another long silence, she stood. I made coffee. I don't want coffee. I know. She disappeared into the kitchen anyway. William remained in front of the fireplace. His eyes moved across the photographs. The first one, paint on their faces. The second, Victoria holding her first award. The third, a neighborhood celebration. He smiled sadly. We never took tonight's picture. Victoria returned, carrying 2 mugs. She handed him one. No. She looked at the empty space above the mantel. We didn't. William followed her gaze. I bought a frame. I know. It's still in the car. Another quiet nod. Neither of them moved to get it. Later that night, after William had fallen asleep upstairs, Victoria walked back into the living room. The house was completely still. She switched on the small lamp beside the sofa. Its warm light settled across the fireplace. She stood there for several minutes, not deciding, remembering. Her eyes stopped on the very first photograph. The day they had saved the fireplace. William's arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing so hard, neither could look at the camera. She reached up carefully, lifted the frame from its hook, held it against her chest. The wall looked strangely different without it. Not empty. Interrupted, Victoria carried the photograph to the dining table. She found a soft cloth and gently wiped a thin layer of dust from the glass. Then she opened the hallway closet. On the top shelf sat a storage box filled with old family albums. She laid the photograph inside. She didn't throw it away. She didn't hide it. She simply put it somewhere she wouldn't see it every day. When she closed the lid, she rested her hand on the box for a moment, then switched off the hallway light. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine spilling through the living room windows. William came downstairs wearing an old sweatshirt. Morning. Victoria looked up from the newspaper. Morning. He kissed the top of her head on his way to the coffee maker. The gesture was automatic. So was hers. She slid his favorite mug toward him before he asked. For a few minutes, everything looked almost normal. William carried his coffee into the living room. He stopped in front of the fireplace. He smiled at the photographs, straightened one frame by habit, then another. Satisfied, he took a sip of coffee and walked away. He never looked high enough to notice that the very first photograph was gone. Victoria watched from the kitchen doorway. She didn't say a word. That afternoon, William remembered the new frame. It's still in the trunk. Victoria looked up from her drawings. The frame? I forgot. I know. I'll bring it in. He walked outside and returned carrying the unopened wooden frame. He placed it on the dining table. We'll print the ceremony picture this week. Victoria looked at the empty frame, then at him. We'll see. William smiled. We always do. She didn't answer. He mistook her silence for exhaustion. The audience could see it was something else. Late that evening, Victoria answered a phone call from the director of the Ashton Children's Reading Center. William could hear her laughing softly from the kitchen. Not loudly, not the carefree laughter from years ago, but the kind that arrived when someone felt seen for their work. He smiled without looking up from his laptop. I'm glad they're taking good care of you, he called. They're wonderful people, Victoria replied. I can't wait to meet them. She hesitated just long enough for the silence to be noticeable. I hope you do. William returned to his screen. He never noticed the pause. He never noticed the missing photograph. He never noticed that Victoria had stopped saying, I know. The wall above the fireplace had begun to change, long before anyone ever spoke the word divorce. Monday mornings had become strangely quiet, not at the office. At home, William still left before Victoria most days, but somewhere along the way, they had stopped lingering over coffee. Their conversations became practical without either of them deciding they should. Did the plumber call? He'll be here Thursday. I left the insurance papers on the counter. I'll mail them. You working late? I don't think so. They kissed goodbye. They meant it. Yet every morning felt a little shorter than the one before. The award on the fireplace stayed exactly where Victoria had placed it. The empty space above the mantel stayed empty. William noticed the missing frame only in the sense that something about the wall looked different every time he walked past it. He always meant to stop and figure out why. He never did. There was always one more email, one more phone call, one more deadline that promised life would settle down afterward. He caught himself saying the familiar sentence again, "Once this project is over." The words sounded so ordinary that he didn't hear them anymore. Victoria did. She simply nodded and finished rinsing her coffee mug. The office had changed too. After the distribution crisis, William found himself working more closely with another department. It meant longer meetings, shared projects, lunches that happened because nobody had time to leave the building. One afternoon, while everyone was gathering their papers after a meeting, a coworker looked at him. "How did your wife's ceremony go?" William stopped halfway through putting his notebook into his bag. "She won." "That's wonderful." He smiled. "It is." She tilted her head. "You don't sound convinced." The smile faded. "I wasn't there." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said quietly, "I'm sorry." Not, "What happened?" Not, "Why?" Just, "I'm sorry." It was the first time someone had acknowledged the disappointment without asking him to explain it. Weeks passed. Nothing unusual happened. That was exactly why William never noticed the change. Some mornings the coworker brought an extra coffee because she was already stopping at the cafe downstairs. "I guessed black." "You guessed right." Another afternoon she walked past his office. "You still leaving Friday at 6? He looked up. "I said that." "Last week." He laughed. "I don't remember." "I figured." She smiled and kept walking. It wasn't flirting. It was familiarity, the kind that grows when people keep showing up in the same place every day. At home, William and Victoria still loved each other, but love had become quieter than routine. One Wednesday evening, William walked through the front door carrying takeout from Victoria's favorite Thai restaurant. "I thought we could eat together." Victoria looked up from the dining table. Blueprints covered nearly every inch of it. "I already ate." He looked at the clock. It wasn't even 7. "You never eat before 7. She smiled gently. "I was hungry." He nodded. "Okay." She rolled up one of the drawings. "How was your day?" He searched for something worth telling. Meetings, emails, traffic, nothing that felt like a story. "Busy." She nodded. "Mine too." That was the entire conversation. Neither of them argued. Neither of them lied. Yet somehow, the silence stayed in the room after the words were gone. The following Friday, William forgot his lunch in the office refrigerator. Around 3 o'clock, someone knocked lightly on his door. "You left this." She handed him the paper bag. He laughed. "I would have remembered around dinner." "I know." He looked at the bag, then at her. "You remember everything." She shrugged. "My grandmother used to say people feel cared for when someone remembers the little things." William smiled politely. "I guess she was right." After she walked away, he sat there longer than he intended, not thinking about her, thinking about the sentence, remembering the little things. He couldn't remember the last time he had asked Victoria how her latest restoration project was going. Not because he didn't care, because he kept assuming there would be time later. The first real boundary wasn't crossed with a touch, or a confession, or even a secret. It happened late one evening after everyone else had gone home. William and the coworker left the building at the same time. Rain had started while they were working. They stood beneath the awning waiting for it to ease. She laughed at something, a story about getting caught in a thunderstorm as a teenager. William laughed too. The sound surprised him. It came easily, too easily. The rain slowed. She waved goodbye and headed toward the parking garage. William stood there another moment before walking to his own car. Halfway home, He turned the radio off. The silence felt different. He realized he couldn't remember the last time he had laughed like that. Instead of feeling happy, he felt unsettled. When he pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Inside, Victoria had left a plate covered with foil in the oven. Beside it was a small handwritten note. "Dinner's warm. Don't forget to eat." William stared at the note longer than he stared at the food. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his wallet. For reasons he couldn't explain. It felt like something he didn't want to lose. He still didn't understand that the most dangerous moment wasn't the conversation in the rain. It was the moment he finally realized he had started measuring comfort in places outside his own home. William never intended to tell a lie. That was the part that stayed with him later. The lies had arrived one ordinary decision at a time. A meeting that lasted longer than expected. Coffee after work because they were already discussing a project. A conversation that continued in the parking lot. A message answered after midnight because it seemed easier than waiting until morning. Every choice felt too small to matter, until they all did. Victoria didn't become suspicious overnight. She simply began noticing things that no longer fit together. William smiled at messages he never mentioned. He answered questions with half-finished sentences. Sometimes she would ask about his day, and he would stop for a second before answering, as if deciding which version of the day belonged at home. She didn't search his phone. She didn't follow him. She didn't ask friends. She watched. People often revealed themselves if nobody hurried them. One Thursday evening, William left his laptop on the dining table before stepping outside to take a phone call. The screen dimmed, then lit up again. A message appeared across the bottom. "Thank you for listening today. I needed that." No heart, no hidden nickname, no flirtation, just one sentence. Victoria looked at it. Nothing more. When William came back inside, she was setting plates on the table. He closed the laptop without noticing the notification. Dinner passed almost normally. Almost. A week later, William arrived home later than expected. He carried flowers. Not because he had forgotten an anniversary. Not because he was hiding guilt. Because he genuinely wanted to make things better. Victoria accepted them with a soft smile. "They're beautiful. I saw them and thought of you." "I know." She placed them in water. They ate dinner together, talked about work, laughed once over a story about the neighbor's dog chasing a delivery driver. For an hour, it almost felt like the years before. Then William's phone vibrated. He looked down automatically. It lasted less than 2 seconds. He put the phone away without answering. Victoria noticed, not the message, the habit. She found the truth on a rainy Tuesday. William had left early for a client meeting. His tablet remained on the kitchen counter beside a stack of invoices. It chimed. She reached over only because she thought it might be work. The message appeared before she touched the screen. "I hate that talking to you has become the best part of my day." Victoria didn't move. She read it once, then looked out the kitchen window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. After several seconds, she placed the tablet exactly where it had been. She finished her coffee, loaded the dishwasher, folded a dish towel, then left for her own office. Nothing in the kitchen looked different. Everything had changed. That evening, William walked through the front door, expecting another ordinary Tuesday. Victoria was sitting in the living room. The television was off. The fireplace lamp was on. His tablet rested on the coffee table. He saw it before he saw her face. "You read it?" She nodded. "I did." William sat down slowly. "I can explain." Victoria looked at him. "I know you can." He opened his mouth. She raised one hand, not in anger, simply asking for a pause. He stopped speaking. For the first time in years, neither of them hurried to fill the silence. Finally, Victoria asked, "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Anything." She held his eyes. "Do you remember the last promise you kept?" She paused. Without apologizing afterward, William frowned. "What?" "The last promise." He searched his memory. The vacation, canceled. The awards ceremony, missed. The anniversary dinner, late. The weekend trip, rescheduled. The photograph they never took. The evenings that became tomorrow. One by one, they came back, not as isolated mistakes, as a pattern. His shoulders dropped. Nothing came. Victoria waited. He looked toward the fireplace, then back at her. I don't know. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them again, there were still no tears. Only certainty. I didn't think you would. The weeks that followed surprised everyone except the two people living inside the marriage. There were no arguments over furniture, no shouting across lawyers' offices, no friends forced to choose sides. William asked if they should try counseling. Victoria answered honestly, I wish we'd gone 2 years ago. Not cruelly. Quietly. He nodded because he knew she was right. They met with mediators, signed documents, discussed the house with the same calm voices they had once used to choose paint colors. Neither of them tried to hurt the other. There had already been enough hurting. On the afternoon the judge finalized the divorce, William drove home before remembering there wasn't really a home waiting anymore. Victoria had already moved into a small townhouse closer to the reading center. The old house felt larger than it ever had. He unlocked the front door. The silence greeted him first. He wandered into the living room almost by instinct. The fireplace stood exactly where it always had. The photographs were still there. But something felt wrong. He stepped closer. His hand reached out automatically to straighten one of the frames. Then he stopped. He counted them once. Then again. 3. There had always been 4. His eyes searched the wall. The first photograph, the one covered in paint, the one where they couldn't stop laughing. It was gone. William stared at the empty space for a long time. Only then did he understand something that had nothing to do with the affair. The photograph hadn't disappeared because the marriage ended. The marriage had already begun disappearing long before the photograph did. The first Monday after the divorce felt strangely ordinary. Victoria woke before sunrise, made coffee, opened the curtains. For a few seconds she stood in the quiet kitchen expecting to hear another set of footsteps coming down the hallway. None came. She took a slow sip of coffee, then picked up her keys and left for work. People expected her to fall apart. Instead, she became quieter, not withdrawn, focused. A week later, she kept an appointment she had scheduled months earlier but had almost canceled 3 times. The therapist smiled warmly as Victoria sat down. What brings you here? Victoria looked toward the window before answering. I don't want to spend the next 10 years wondering who I used to be. The therapist nodded. Then let's start with who you are today. Victoria smiled faintly. I don't think I've asked myself that in a long time. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in pieces. One Saturday, an old college friend invited her to lunch. She almost declined out of habit, then stopped herself. An hour later, she found herself laughing over stories neither of them had told in years. Driving home, she realized something. For nearly 2 hours, she hadn't thought about the divorce. The realization surprised her more than the laughter had. The reading center slowly became more than another project. Children wandered through the halls after school, filling the building with conversations, questions, and the kind of energy no blueprint could ever capture. One afternoon, a little girl tugged gently on Victoria's sleeve. Did you help build this place? Victoria smiled. A lot of people helped. The little girl looked around the room. My favorite part is the window. Victoria followed her gaze. Sunlight poured across rows of books. Mine too. The child ran off before another word was spoken. Victoria stood there smiling, not because of the compliment, because she had helped create something that would outlive her. That feeling stayed with her all afternoon. Across town, William lived inside a different rhythm. The house was quieter than he remembered. He still reached for 2 coffee mugs some mornings before putting one back into the cabinet. He still slowed down outside the grocery store where he used to buy Victoria fresh flowers. He still glanced toward the passenger seat before remembering nobody was waiting there. One evening, while searching for an old receipt, he opened his wallet. A folded piece of paper slipped onto the floor. He recognized it immediately. Dinner's warm. Don't forget to eat. He read the note 3 times. It wasn't the handwriting that broke him. It was the date. Victoria had written it months before the affair, months before the divorce, months before either of them had admitted the truth. He folded the note carefully and placed it back inside his wallet. This time, He understood it wasn't a reminder about dinner. It had been one more quiet attempt to care for someone who kept believing there would always be another evening. Work no longer distracted him the way it once had. He finished meetings, answered emails, solved problems. People congratulated him on another promotion. He smiled politely. The office celebrated with cake. Someone asked what he was going to do with the raise. William looked at the paper plate in his hands. I don't know. For the first time in years, he actually meant it. Autumn arrived. Leaves gathered across the front porch of the old house. William finally spent a Saturday cleaning the yard. As he swept leaves into a pile, he looked through the living room window. The fireplace was visible from where he stood. 3 photographs still hung above the mantel. The empty space where the first photograph had once been caught his attention again. He leaned the broom against the porch railing, walked inside, stood in front of the wall. He reached up instinctively to straighten one of the frames, then stopped. None of them were crooked. For years, he had been correcting picture frames. He had never asked why one had disappeared. The realization settled over him quietly. He had become very good at noticing what was slightly out of place. He had missed what was truly missing. Victoria's life continued moving forward in small, almost invisible ways. She accepted an invitation to mentor young architects. She attended neighborhood dinners she once declined because William was working late. She started taking Sunday morning walks without checking the time. None of those choices erased the years she had shared with William. They simply reminded her that life still had room to grow. One rainy afternoon, volunteers gathered at the reading center to repaint a classroom damaged by a leaking pipe. Everyone arrived wearing old clothes. Paint trays lined the floor. Music played softly from someone's phone. A volunteer handed Victoria a roller. "You've done this before?" She laughed. "Once or twice." "You sound confident." "I've had good teachers." The room filled with easy conversation. Someone accidentally splashed blue paint across the front of their shirt. Everyone laughed. A few minutes later, another volunteer reached for the same paint tray at the exact moment Victoria did. Their hands bumped. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping back. "My fault," Victoria replied. He smiled. "I think the paint survived." She looked down at the blue streak across her sleeve and laughed. "So did we." The conversation ended there. No lingering glances, no dramatic music, only 2 people returning to the work in front of them. Across the room, another volunteer raised a camera. "Nobody move." Several people turned instinctively. Victoria looked toward the voice, still smiling, still holding the paint roller. The shutter clicked. She didn't think about the photograph. She didn't know where it would end up. She simply went back to painting. Some memories arrive because we chase them. Others arrive quietly, while we're busy building something new. Victoria didn't notice Daniel the first time they met. She noticed the waiting room, children coloring quietly at a small table, an elderly couple arguing gently over whose turn it was to pay for parking, a nurse humming to herself while organizing files. The community health clinic felt busy without feeling rushed. Victoria had stopped by to discuss plans for a small reading corner the clinic wanted to build for young patients. The receptionist smiled. "Dr. Daniel will be right with you." Victoria glanced at her watch. "It's okay. I know doctors run late." The receptionist smiled again. "He doesn't like to." Almost on cue, the office door opened. A man in his early 40s stepped into the hallway, removed his gloves, and apologized to the family leaving before greeting the next patient. Only after everyone else had been helped did he walk toward Victoria. "You must be Victoria." She stood. "I am. I'm Daniel." He checked his watch. "I told you 10:30. He smiled apologetically. "It's 10:32. Victoria laughed. "I wasn't counting." "I was." They walked through the clinic together. Daniel wasn't interested in impressing her. He pointed out cracked walls, poor lighting, an empty corner beside the pediatric waiting area. "This is where the children usually end up." Victoria looked around. "Because there isn't anywhere else to go." He nodded. "If they have to wait, I'd rather they wait with books." She smiled. "I can work with that." "Good." When do you need the first drawings? Daniel thought for a second. When do you think they're realistic? 2 weeks. He nodded once. Then I'll expect them in 2 weeks. No bargaining, no pressure. Just agreement. 14 days later, Victoria walked into the clinic carrying a portfolio. Daniel was already waiting in the lobby. He looked at his watch. Right on time. So are you. I said I'd be here. He answered it so matter-of-factly that the conversation simply moved on. Victoria didn't think about it again until she was driving home. She realized something strange. She hadn't wondered whether he would remember. The project grew slowly. Sometimes they met for 15 minutes, sometimes an hour, sometimes not at all. If Daniel said he would send revised measurements by Friday afternoon, the email arrived Friday afternoon. If he promised to call, the phone rang when he said it would. There was nothing exciting about it. That was exactly what surprised Victoria. Consistency had become unfamiliar enough to feel noticeable. One rainy afternoon, Daniel canceled a meeting. Victoria smiled to herself. There it is. Life happens. Her phone rang less than a minute later. I'm sorry. Daniel's voice sounded tired. A patient was rushed into surgery. You don't have to explain. I wanted to. He paused. Can we meet tomorrow at 4? That works. I'll be there. The next afternoon, Victoria pulled into the clinic parking lot at 3:58. Daniel was already unlocking the conference room. He looked up and waved. You beat me by a minute. She laughed. I was about to say the same thing. Weeks passed. The reading corner slowly became a real place instead of a set of drawings. Bookshelves arrived. Volunteers painted soft blue walls. Parents donated children's books. One Saturday morning, Victoria stopped by to check the progress. Daniel was on a ladder, replacing a light fixture. I thought doctors hired people for this. I did. He tightened the last screw. They're running late. Victoria looked at him. So, you started without them? The children won't care who installed the light. She shook her head, smiling. You always have an answer. Occupational hazard. She picked up a paint roller, leaning against the wall. Where do you need me? He pointed toward the far corner. Only if you're sure. I came dressed for it. Neither of them said much while they worked. Music played softly from someone's speaker. A volunteer accidentally splashed white paint across Daniel's sleeve. I'm so sorry. Daniel looked down. It's paint. He smiled. I think we're using it correctly. The room filled with easy laughter. Not loud, just comfortable. Before leaving that afternoon, Daniel wiped his hands on an old towel. Same time next Saturday? Victoria looked at her calendar. I'm free. I'll put you down for 9. She nodded. I'll be here. Good. He picked up a box of books and headed toward the hallway. No lingering conversation. No awkward silence. No attempt to make the moment something it wasn't. Victoria watched him disappear around the corner. Then she looked at the half-finished reading room. Everything was slowly coming together. Not because anyone was rushing, because everyone kept showing up. Driving home, Victoria stopped at a red light. Without thinking, she smiled. The smile caught her by surprise. It wasn't because someone new had entered her life. It was because, for the first time in years, she had spent an entire afternoon without wondering whether someone would keep their word. The light turned green. She drove on, for the first time since the divorce. Peace didn't feel quiet. It felt alive. The divorce is behind him, but William discovers that moving on and understanding are not the same thing. At first, he keeps himself busy with work, believing time will eventually dull the regret. Instead, the opposite happens. Without the daily distractions of marriage, ordinary places begin awakening memories he had forgotten. A hardware store reminds him of the day they restored the fireplace together. An Italian restaurant reminds him of the anniversary dinner he canceled because one meeting turned into an entire evening. Driving past the museum where Victoria received her award, he suddenly realizes something he had spent years blaming on traffic, emergencies, and work. He had still chosen one final meeting before leaving. No one forced that decision. For the first time, William stops defending his past and starts examining it. Back at the old house, he opens a forgotten storage box from their renovation years. Inside are paint samples, receipts, handwritten sketches, and Victoria's original drawing of the fireplace wall. In the corner she had written, "Leave enough room for the memories we haven't made yet." The sentence stays with him. He begins noticing a painful pattern. Every photograph above the fireplace marked an achievement, a promotion, a completed project, an anniversary. But there were almost no photographs of ordinary afternoons, lazy weekends, coffee on the porch, burnt pancakes, or evenings when nothing special happened except that they were together. He slowly understands that he spent years preparing for milestones while overlooking the quiet moments that gave those milestones meaning. Over the next several days, William starts canceling unnecessary meetings without being asked. He leaves work on time. He calls his parents simply to talk. He has dinner with an old friend instead of postponing again. None of these choices are attempts to win Victoria back. They are the first signs that he is beginning to live differently. Even so, one hope refuses to disappear. He still believes that if he can truly explain himself, not excuse himself, but explain himself, Victoria might finally understand what he failed to say for years. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, his phone rings. The screen shows a name he hasn't seen in months. Victoria. Her voice is calm, steady. She tells him she's been sorting through a few things at the old house and has found some belongings that still belong to him. Then she asks a simple question. "Could you come by tomorrow evening?" William agrees immediately. After the call ends, he quietly removes every meeting from his calendar. For the first time in years, nothing feels more important than arriving exactly when he promised. As he locks his office and heads toward the parking garage, hope quietly returns. He believes this invitation might be the beginning of another chance. William left the office 20 minutes early, not because he needed the extra time, because, for the first time in years, he refused to risk arriving late. He checked the address in his phone, even though he could have driven there with his eyes closed. The old house had once been the place he hurried home to. Now it felt like somewhere he had to earn the right to enter again. He stopped at a traffic light and glanced at the passenger seat. No flowers. He had almost bought some, then changed his mind. Flowers had become his favorite way of apologizing after disappointing Victoria. This evening didn't deserve another familiar gesture. If she had asked him to come, he wanted to arrive with honesty instead of habit. As the city slipped past his windows, William rehearsed conversations that never sounded right. "I'm sorry. Too small. I never stopped loving you. True, but incomplete. I thought I was building a better life for us. Also true. Still incomplete." Every sentence explained what he had intended. None of them changed what she had lived. He turned the radio off. Silence felt more honest. Halfway there, he passed the neighborhood park, where they had once spent an entire Saturday repainting old benches for a community fundraiser. Victoria had ended up with blue paint on the bridge of her nose. He had laughed so hard that he accidentally dropped his own paintbrush. Someone nearby had taken a photograph. He couldn't remember where that picture ended up. What he remembered was something Victoria had said while they were cleaning their hands afterward. "We should do things like this more often." He had smiled. "We will." Then, almost automatically, he had added, "After this project." The memory landed differently now. It wasn't one postponed afternoon. It was the beginning of a language he had spoken for years without hearing it. A few miles later, he drove past the bookstore where Victoria used to disappear for an hour every Sunday. He almost pulled into the parking lot, not because he wanted to go inside, because he suddenly realized he had spent years asking how long she'd be there. He couldn't remember the last time he had asked what she was reading. The difference hurt. His phone buzzed through the car speakers. An executive from work. William looked at the screen. Months earlier, he would have answered before the second ring. Today, he pressed the button that sent the call to voicemail. The phone fell silent again. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel guilty for choosing something outside of work. He wondered, almost painfully, how many moments like this Victoria had waited to see. As the old neighborhood came into view, William slowed down. The streets looked smaller. The trees looked taller. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks where he and Victoria had once talked about raising a family. He pulled onto their old street. Instinctively, he looked toward the front porch. The light was on, just as it had been on so many evenings when Victoria waited for him to come home. His chest tightened. Maybe this time, he thought. Maybe this time, I'm not too late. He parked across from the house, but didn't get out immediately. The engine idled softly. His hands rested on the steering wheel. He closed his eyes for a moment and made himself one promise. If Victoria wanted forgiveness, he would ask for it. If she wanted answers, he would give them. If she wanted silence, he would respect it. Tonight wasn't about convincing her. It was about finally listening. He switched off the engine. The sudden quiet felt enormous. He stepped onto the driveway. Every crack in the concrete looked familiar. The flower beds Victoria had planted years ago had grown fuller. Someone had been taking care of them. He reached the porch. For a brief second, he almost reached into his pocket for the old house key. Then he remembered. It no longer belonged to him. He let his hand fall. Instead, he straightened his jacket, took one slow breath, and pressed the doorbell. Footsteps approached from inside, steady, unhurried. The door opened. Victoria stood there with the same calm expression that had unsettled him from the very beginning. She smiled politely. "Hi, William." He smiled back, his heart full of hope. "Hi." She stepped aside. "Come in." William crossed the threshold, believing he had arrived at the beginning of a second chance. Victoria stepped aside without another word. William walked into the house slowly. Nothing had been remodeled. The hardwood floors were the same. The bookshelves were still built into the wall, exactly where they had designed them years earlier. The familiar scent of cedar and fresh coffee lingered in the air. Everything looked almost unchanged. Almost. "Coffee?" Victoria asked. "If you're having some, I already made it." She disappeared into the kitchen. William remained standing in the living room. His eyes wandered naturally. The old piano, the reading chair beside the window, the worn blanket folded over the arm of the sofa. So many ordinary things were exactly where he remembered them. It should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt as though the house had learned how to breathe without him. Victoria returned with 2 mugs. She handed him one. "Careful, it's hot." He accepted it. "Thanks." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The silence wasn't awkward. It was unfamiliar. Years earlier, one of them would have rushed to fill it. Now neither felt the need. William looked down at his coffee. "I've thought about this conversation 1,000 times." Victoria nodded gently. "I figured you might have. I don't even know where to start." "You don't have to start anywhere in particular." He let out a slow breath. "I was angry for a long time." She looked at him, waiting. At work, at myself, at everything. He managed a tired smile. "I kept telling myself the affair was the biggest mistake I ever made." He paused. "I don't think that anymore." Victoria didn't interrupt. "I think." He searched for the words. "I think I spent years asking you to wait for a version of me that never showed up." The sentence hung quietly between them. Victoria lowered her eyes to her coffee. William continued, "I thought every late night was for us." "I know. I thought every promotion was bringing us closer to the life we wanted." "I know. I honestly believed I'd make everything up to you later." "I know." Her answers weren't bitter. That somehow made them harder to hear. William looked toward the window. "I wish I had understood sooner." Victoria didn't respond. She didn't need to. The room already held everything that had gone unsaid for years. William took another sip of coffee. As he lowered the mug, his attention drifted toward the fireplace. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The mantel still held a few books. A small clock, Victoria's Architecture Award. Then his eyes moved upward. The wall looked lighter. He frowned slightly. Something had changed, not dramatically, subtly. His gaze traveled across the photographs one by one. The anniversary, the completed kitchen, their first Christmas in the house. Then, he stopped. His heartbeat stumbled. The wedding portrait was gone. In its place hung a candid photograph he had never seen before. Victoria stood inside a bright children's reading room. Her jeans were streaked with white and blue paint. She was laughing, not posing, laughing so hard that her head had tilted back. Beside her stood Daniel. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. There was paint across one cheek. Neither of them was looking at the camera. Someone had captured the moment without them noticing. William stared at it. His first feeling wasn't jealousy. It was recognition, paint, laughter, a room still under construction. Something about it felt painfully familiar. His mind searched backward before he could stop it. The first photograph, the fireplace, the day he and Victoria rebuilt the house. They had looked exactly like that, covered in paint, too busy laughing to notice someone taking a picture. He took one slow step toward the fireplace. When? His voice barely carried across the room. Victoria joined him, but remained a respectful distance away. Last spring. He nodded absently. The reading center. Yes. William kept staring at the photograph. For a long moment, he wasn't looking at Daniel. He was looking at the version of himself that used to exist. The man who once believed an afternoon with a paintbrush could be the best day of the month. He swallowed. I didn't even realize. Oh, his sentence faded. Victoria finally spoke, not loudly, not coldly, simply with the calm honesty that had replaced disappointment. William. He turned toward her. She looked at the fireplace instead of at him. Then she asked the question that had been waiting for years. Can you tell me which picture disappeared first? William looked back at the wall. His eyes moved from the new photograph to the empty space where the wedding portrait had once hung, to the remaining photographs that silently traced the life they had built together. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. For the first time in years, William realized he didn't need a better explanation. He needed an answer he didn't yet have. And standing before the fireplace, surrounded by the evidence of an entire marriage, he discovered that silence could be more revealing than any apology he had ever rehearsed. William kept staring at the wall. The question lingered between them. Can you tell me which picture disappeared first? He looked at the empty space, then at the photograph from the reading center. Finally, he shook his head. I don't know. Victoria nodded, as if she had expected that answer. I know. She walked to the built-in cabinet beside the fireplace. From the bottom drawer, she removed a large brown envelope. Its edges were worn. The paper had softened with age. She carried it back carefully and placed it on the coffee table between them. William looked at it. You kept it? I kept a lot of things. She opened the envelope and slowly slid out a framed photograph wrapped in tissue paper. William recognized it immediately. The first photograph, the day they rebuilt the fireplace. The frame had faded slightly over the years, but the picture was exactly as he remembered. Victoria laughed with her head thrown back. His own face was streaked with white paint. They looked exhausted, happy, certain. William smiled before he realized he was smiling. I used to love this picture. Victoria looked at him. You called it your favorite. I did. You said, if the house ever burned down, this was the first thing you'd save. A faint laugh escaped him. That sounds like me. It does. The smile disappeared as quickly as it had come. William studied the photograph for a long time. I remembered the chimney collapsing. Victoria nodded. And you insisted we could still fix it. You wanted to hire someone. You refused. He smiled again. We argued for an hour, and then we rebuilt it together. Silence settled comfortably around the memory. Neither of them hurried to leave it. Finally, Victoria asked, what happened after that day? William answered almost immediately. We finished the living room. And after that, the kitchen. And after that? He hesitated. My promotion. She nodded toward one of the photographs still hanging above the mantel. The second picture. William followed her eyes. He remembered the celebration, the dinner, friends filling the house, champagne, laughter. He smiled. Then Victoria asked softly, what happened the next weekend? William searched his memory. Nothing. He frowned. I can't remember. Victoria didn't fill the silence. She walked to another photograph. Our anniversary. William smiled again. I surprised you with that cabin. You did. She let another quiet moment pass. What happened the week after? Again, nothing. His smile slowly faded. He moved to the next photograph himself. Our kitchen renovation. Another celebration, another achievement, another picture. Victoria didn't ask this time. William already knew. He searched for the ordinary days between those photographs. Sunday mornings, weeknight dinners, conversations on the porch, walks after work. He found almost nothing. He looked back at the wall. Every photograph marked a milestone, but the years between them had become strangely empty. He whispered, I remember the occasions. Victoria remained silent. He kept staring, but I don't remember the life between them. Neither of them moved. The room itself seemed to hold the weight of that realization. After a long moment, Victoria picked up her coffee again. I didn't remove that first photograph after the divorce. William turned toward her. I removed it after the awards ceremony. His eyes searched hers. The night I came home alone. She nodded once. You brought flowers. William closed his eyes. I thought I could fix it. I know. I thought it was one bad night. I know. He looked toward the empty chair beside the window. The memory arrived with painful clarity. The reserved seat, his unopened suit hanging in the back seat of his car, the apology text. He covered his face with one hand. I kept thinking the affair destroyed us. Victoria shook her head gently. No. Her voice carried no anger, only truth. The affair answered a question I had already been asking myself for years. William looked up. What question? She held his gaze for the first time since he had arrived. Whether I was still building a life with someone. She paused, or simply waiting for one. The words landed without force. They didn't need any. William looked back at the fireplace, at the first photograph resting on the coffee table, at the empty space above the mantel, at the reading center photograph. Then something shifted inside him. The wall had never been decorating the house. It had been keeping time. Each photograph marked a season when they had stopped long enough to notice each other. Each empty space marked the years they hadn't. He finally understood why Victoria had asked about the missing picture. The wedding portrait hadn't disappeared first. The habit of choosing each other had. He lowered his head. For years, he had believed the fireplace displayed memories. Now he saw what it had really been displaying. The slow, almost invisible health of their marriage. And the wall had noticed the change long before he ever did. Neither of them spoke. The old clock on the mantel filled the room with a slow, steady rhythm. For years, William had barely noticed it. Now every tick seemed to measure something he could never get back. He sat down on the edge of the sofa. The first photograph rested on the coffee table between them. The afternoon sun had shifted, washing the faded frame in warm light. William reached toward it, but stopped before his fingers touched the glass. I've been asking myself one question ever since you called. Victoria waited. When did we stop being forever? She didn't answer immediately. She looked toward the fireplace, toward the empty space where the first photograph had once hung. Then she spoke with the same quiet honesty that had carried them through the entire conversation. The day tomorrow became more important than today. William lowered his eyes. She continued, It wasn't one meeting. I know it wasn't the awards ceremony. I know it wasn't even the affair. He nodded. I know. It was years of believing life would begin after the next deadline, the next promotion, the next project. A faint, tired smile crossed William's face. I used to think I was protecting our future. I know you did. I never realized I was asking you to postpone your life with me. Victoria looked at him gently. You weren't asking once. She paused. You were asking every week. The words settled over the room, not as an accusation, as recognition. William leaned back against the sofa. His eyes drifted from one photograph to another. The anniversary, the kitchen renovation, Christmas morning. Every picture captured a celebration, a finish line. He suddenly understood what had always been missing. There were no photographs of the evenings that had mattered just as much. No picture of the night they ate pizza on the living room floor because the furniture hadn't arrived. No picture of Victoria reading while he pretended not to watch her. No picture of burnt pancakes on a Sunday morning. No picture of quiet conversations on the porch after the rain. They had preserved achievements. They had forgotten ordinary life. He whispered almost to himself. "I thought memories came from big moments." Victoria answered softly. "The best ones usually don't." Silence returned. This time, it felt peaceful. Not empty, simply complete. After a while, Victoria stood. "I should let you take your things." William looked up. "I don't think that's why you asked me to come." She smiled. "No. I think you wanted me to see this." She glanced toward the fireplace. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Thank you." There was no dramatic embrace, no last-minute plea, no promise that this time would be different. Some promises arrive after they're needed. Others arrive after they're possible. Victoria walked toward the front door. She opened it and turned back. "I truly hope you're happy one day, William." He met her eyes. For the first time since they had married, he answered, without trying to persuade anyone of anything. "I hope I learn how." She gave one gentle nod. Then she stepped outside, quietly closing the door behind her. The house fell still. William remained where he was. Minutes passed. Then he stood and walked toward the fireplace. He looked at every photograph slowly, not searching for mistakes, searching for the people they had once been. His gaze settled on the empty hook. He smiled sadly. "I kept thinking the first picture disappeared." His voice was barely above a whisper. He shook his head. "No." Another long pause. "We disappeared first." He reached into his jacket pocket and found his wallet. Inside, folded along its old creases, was the note Victoria had written years ago. "Dinner's warm. Don't forget to eat." He unfolded it carefully. For years he had read those words as a reminder. Now he understood them differently. She hadn't been reminding him about dinner. She had been inviting him home. He folded the note once more. Instead of putting it back into his wallet, he placed it gently on the mantel beneath the empty hook. Not as a goodbye, as an acknowledgement. Some lessons arrive too late to save what was lost. They can still change the person who carries them forward. William walked to the front door. Before leaving, he turned around one last time. The evening sun filled the living room. The photographs glowed softly against the wall. The empty space no longer looked unfinished. It looked honest. He opened the door and stepped outside. The porch creaked beneath his feet, just as it had years ago when he and Victoria carried buckets of paint into a house everyone else had abandoned. Back then, they had believed they were rebuilding a home. Only now did William understand that homes are never held together by brick, wood, or stone. They are held together by ordinary days that people choose not to postpone. He closed the door gently behind him. Inside, the fireplace remained exactly where it had always been, silent, patient, never judging, only remembering. And if those old photographs had recorded anything at all, it wasn't perfection. It was a simple truth that William would carry with him for the rest of his life. Love is rarely lost in one unforgettable catastrophe. More often, it slips away through ordinary moments that seem small enough to postpone, until one day there are no tomorrows left to borrow from. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. When do you think William truly lost Victoria? Was it the missed award ceremony? The affair? Or was it long before either of them realized what was happening? Share your answer in the comments. I read them all, and some of the best conversations happen there. If this story reminded you that the smallest moments often matter the most, please subscribe to the Greer Stories and join us for more unforgettable stories about love, family, second chances, and the quiet decisions that shape our lives. And tonight, before tomorrow gets busy, take a moment to call someone, hug someone, or simply be present with someone you love. Sometimes, the ordinary moments become the memories we miss the most.